Now, there are reports that millions of persons with disabilities in Nigeria continue to face daily struggles, not just from their condition, but from a society that is yet to fully include them. From a lack of sufficient home to cater to their needs to limited job opportunities, many persons with disabilities are left behind despite their talents, skills, and dreams. Now, according to CODISA, a non-governmental organization, the number of homes taking care of PWDs in the country is not commensurate with their population and the amount of support needed for persons with special needs. The call is for all Nigerians to be intentional with the needs of the PWDs. Their demand is simple: inclusion, not isolation. A ramp instead of a step. A chance instead of a maybe later. As Nigerians, our strength is in our unity, and that includes everyone. So they're saying, let us speak up, show up, and support persons with disabilities, because when we lift one, we lift all. Now, for more on this, I'm joined by Olaoluwa Awojoodu. Olaoluwa is an advocate for the well-being of persons with disability and the leader of CODISA Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us on the news, Olaoluwa. Now, please, can you go ahead and explain the inclusion of persons with what the inclusion of persons with disabilities truly means for our society?
Yes. When we are talking about inclusion of persons with disabilities, I like to think about it as elimination of barrier, which is elimination of barriers to education, elimination of barriers to employment, and even barriers to social gatherings and social events, access to public spaces, access to private work environments, so those are the things that we need to work on to be able to fully include people with disabilities.
Okay. Now, what are some of the major challenges faced by people with disabilities in Nigeria that are often overlooked by the general public?
So there are a lot of them, but I'll try and start from the big ones. One of the biggest one is just being able to be independent. Something that people have to be aware of is that nobody really wants to be a liability. Nobody wants to get to an office and they have to carry you or carry your wheelchair for you to be able to get in. So because of that, first of all, we need to figure out how can we get people with disabilities employed in our workforce? What can the government do to help us so that a lot of these people can start earning and, earn a living for themselves without depending on others. There's also access to education, which a lot that's been worked on already. And thank Lagos State government, most of the schools, the public schools, primary, secondary, are already inclusive. So you have joint classes for the special kids as well. There's also access to public spaces. Take, for example, today in Nigeria, only one bank, I think, has access to wheelchair for somebody on a wheelchair to be able to get in. Every other person, you can't go to a bank or you have to go through a back door. That is not right. You have workplaces that have no ramps, no elevators, things like that, we need to work on to be able to get them fully included into the society. Even talk about living areas. You have, let's say you're even employed, you have a disability, you're employed, you want to get your own housing, you can't even get a decent house, that would allow you to properly get in, and use the place as somebody with a disability. So there's so much that we need to do to be able to get people with disabilities fully included into our society.
Okay. Now, in your opinion, Olaoluwa, what steps should both the government and private sector take in order to improve the lives of persons with disabilities?
Okay. So on the government part, the laws, especially in Lagos State, are already there. They exist. Lagos State has very robust laws on disabilities. Where we fall short is enforcement. So a bit more work has to be done on enforcement. Also, it would be encouraged if we could have some form of quota system that encourages even private organizations, because the government can't employ everyone, so even private companies should have a quota of employment for people with disabilities. That would really go a long way. And then more importantly is for us as individuals to be socially conscious, to know that, this person with a disability is really just one of us, and make sure that as we are creating our work environments, we are actually considering them as well and making sure that those places are accessible to them. So that would really, really go a long way.
Okay, so what about your organization and your team? What are you doing with the government in order to make lives better for people with disabilities?
Oh, so in terms of government, it's mostly around engagement. So we do a lot of engagement, conversations, trying to see how we can move things forward. But outside of the government, as an organization, we do a lot on empowerment of people with disabilities, empowerment of the institutions of people with disabilities, trainings, advocacy. So we try and do all that just to make sure that we are at least doing our part, because there's so much to do. So we're trying to do our own part, and then hopefully we get enough partners, including private bodies and the government, to be able to eventually fill that gap.
Okay. Now, we often hear about disability rights. What are some specific rights that are frequently denied to people with disabilities, and how can these be addressed?
All right. So take, for instance, access to public places, very big one. You know, in Nigeria, we tend to take that for granted, but this is something that someone with disability should be able to have rights to. We can also talk about, you know, access to good living places. I mentioned that earlier. The gap is so huge. Like, you're going to need to have some form of living assistance, which is really unfair because nobody really wants to be a liability. But you find yourself in a situation where the environment does not, you know, accommodate you appropriately. Another good example would even be education or even employment. So I have a friend who has a kid abroad. The child has cerebral palsy, and the child is being employed by the school to collect meal tickets daily. So when the kids come for lunch, you know, they pay with meal tickets. So this child with cerebral palsy collects that, you know, just very simple tasks, and then gets paid for that. And this is just a child in school, meaning that the school, the government, the institutions are already thinking about how to employ this, you know, this child, or even as they grow older, to be able to do certain functions, you know, like collecting meal tickets. It's not that complicated. But in Nigeria, we don't even have any of such opportunities, you know, so people with disabilities are completely cut out from the system. They have to struggle and fight.
Yeah.
You know, so,
yeah. All right. Now, what role do Nigerian families and communities play in fostering inclusion for persons with disabilities?
All right. So for the family, I think the very first thing for a lot of families is that you need to understand that there are certain things that you do in life that you are guilty of. You know, maybe you did something bad, even raised your child, you know, in a bad way. But if you have a child that is special, a child with disabilities, it is not your fault. It is not something to be ashamed of. You know, you have no excuse to start hiding that child. That child is a child of God, you know, should be loved by you, should be loved by his or her friends. So it's not a stigma. We need to get rid of the stigma. You need to let the child play with his or her peers, let the child go to school, let him or her get an education, you know. And when you start doing that, you realize that even in the schools, right, the child will start having friends, will stop feeling excluded, will know what I can do, what I cannot do. And then gradually, once we get rid of the stigma as a society, then a lot of things can happen from there.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Olaoluwa, for your time and for speaking to us on this.
Thank you very much for having me.